Do you like movies and television? Would you like to learn more about the magic behind the movies and learn how they get from the minds of the creators to the screen? Do you consider yourself a bit of a film buff and would like to know more without going back to school? Then this is the show for you. Mincing Movie Magic is a broadcast designed to stimulate your intellect and explore the minds of screenwriters, producers, directors, and others behind the scenes who create the real magic we see on the screen. Each week, you can listen to screenwriter and producer Tom Blumquist and professional magician Scott Wells as they discuss film and the magic that goes into every production. From time to time, they welcome friends from the movie industry to give other points of view that brought their visions to life on screen. This is Mincing Movie Magic. Please welcome Hollywood writer, producer, and director Tom Blumquist, along with your host, Scott Wells.
Hello, I'm here. Thank you very much. Scott Wells here. So glad to have you guys in with us here today. And I wanted to say hello to Gene Protus. Hey there, Gino. Glad that you're here, joining us from Houston, Texas. This is a special episode here this evening. And I say that because this was unfortunately due to some unforeseen circumstances, had to be recorded a little bit earlier today. That means that you will be able to see this in its entirety as we recorded it. But the downside is you'll not be able to have your questions answered in real time. What we're going to be doing is allowing you to still interact with us, just like, for an example, Harriet Jacobson over there from Michigan. Hey, Harriet, glad that you're here. Thank you very much for joining us. So I'll be able still to be in the back room, so I'll see people who are coming in and asking questions and that kind of a thing too. It's just that we're going to, again, have this pre-recorded, and occasionally I'll just kind of run a little banner along the side, the bottom over here to let you know that this has been pre-recorded, which will allow you, again, to post a question if you have something over in there, and we will answer that again next week. This is really kind of a film school and a class, if you will, in which there are people coming in from week to week who are our guests, and it's led by Tom Blumquist, who was a teacher at Cal State, Caltech. He was out in California, and also he was has been involved in the film industry for many decades. Anyhow, so we're going to jump into this. We've got a wonderful guest this evening who is a composer of film and television, including lots of shows from days gone by, like Hart To Hart, Cagney Lacy, and lots of others. And he unfolds a lot of interesting things about his where he came from and how he kind of got into this as well. So I know that you're going to be enjoying this. And so if you don't get again, a chance to have your questions answered immediately this week, don't worry. Still post them. Say hello. I'll still be here to include you and give your shout outs in this as well. So let's get this party started along with my co-host, Tom Blumquist. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mincing Movie Magic with my buddy over here, Tom Blumquist.
Hello. Hey, Scott. How you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. What an episode we had there last week. That was great. I thought, chatting with him, so we got to learn a little bit more about being an assistant director and kind of what they do, and the first AD, the second AD, and all that. If people didn't get a chance to see that, you can go back. It's in the archives. You can watch it on Facebook and YouTube. We always have great guests. I mean, all these people are friends of Tom's you've worked with or you've had as students, and you have had an amazing life, man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it has been amazing, and I mean that in the most grateful way. And the thing for people who are film buffs to know that are watching this and watch any of these is, you have your production personnel that everybody thinks about, the crew, the guys with the work gloves and moving lights around and pulling cables, and carpenters and all kinds of people. And then you have your what we call creatives, but you've got your director, your screenwriter. Maybe some of the producers are not just dollars and cents people, but are have a creative purpose. And then into post-production, you have, of course, the editor and you have the composer, which is why we have a fine one with us now. Composer is truly one of the most essential people on the creative side of a production. And one of the reasons they're essential, like the film editor, who is totally objective when they get this big kind of box of footage from the set to put together, the composer is completely objective. They've read the script, but they're not there. They don't go through all the histrionics of actually shooting.
They're not invested in the day-to-day shoots and everything, and scripts or anything.
They usually come in when you have a cut. If not the final cut, a very advanced cut from which they start to think of ideas and stuff.
But they're not involved in the daily rushes or any of that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely not. And for good reason, because they need to be clear and objective on what it is these people tried to do, and then what they actually accomplished, and what do I need to do as the composer musically to help get them to the finish line. So Ron Ramin, our guest today, is just a wonderful composer, and he's done probably 30 TV movies in the U.S. and Canada, lots and lots of TV series going back to Fantasy Island and Hart to Hart, some of those classics.
Wow.
A fine series I worked on CBS called Christy, based on Catherine Marshall's novel, and then 8 years later, the sequel miniseries to Christy, which we can talk about because musically it had to change.
Interesting.
For legal reasons.
Okay.
And a lot of other shows, but he and I worked together on those. We worked together on Walker, Texas Ranger. He was one of a couple of composers that kind of alternated doing episodes, and we had a great time. So let's get him in here. Get in.
Okay, welcome, Ron Ramin.
Right.
Hey, there he is.
Nice to be here.
Hey, Ron. So glad to have you over here. Man, this is exciting. I love music, and I don't know whether I love music more or movies more and television. And for you to combine those is just phenomenal. I'm so glad to have you here and talk about this. And you have, as Tom had just said, scripted for both film and television. There's got to be some sort of a difference between the two, I expect. Some are episodic, where you would have to have music for each of the 13 or however many episodes, whereas a movie is an hour and a half or 2 hours. How does that differ as far as preparing for those?
Well, it's quite different. First of all, my experience has been doing episodic television, primetime series, and movies and miniseries, not theatricals. And when you do a movie that's going to be shown in the theater, it's the same. It's the same general description, but the process is different. I can talk a little bit better about the difference between doing a TV movie and doing a series. When you're doing a series, it's basically you're in for the long haul.
Right.
I mean, you as opposed to a movie for television, which is a one-off. You have to create the theme. You have to create the characters. You have to do that every time you do a new project. When you're doing a series, you actually are doing a disservice if you're trying to do something new and different every time you have an episode. You need to have continuity. You become a character, maybe not as important as the actors themselves, but you need to be the glue, and you need to have a reference point. As a matter of fact, I remember years ago, I did Knots Landing. I did a few episodes of a nighttime serial called Knots Landing, and at some point, the producer said, "You know what? We think we're going to change the theme of the show," which was very well known. We're going to change the theme. We're going to not do it with orchestra. We're going to do it with electronics. We're going to make it more contemporary. And they had to go back to the original because people were outraged. You wouldn't think people would be outraged by something like this, but they said, "What happened to our beloved theme with violins and the rest of an orchestra?" They were offended. So you have to be very careful when you're doing a TV series that you provide that continuity. The audience expects it, and I think they deserve it.
Was that the one with Joan Crawford, or not Joan?
Knots Landing, it was sort of in the vein of Dynasty and all of Falcon Crest. And
sure,
all
I think
those.
maybe it was Dynasty I was thinking of.
That was a good
Joan
show.
Collins. That's
Joan
what I was
Collins. No, it wasn't Joan Collins, but it was the same basic idea.
Okay.
And, I have a funny story I can tell you about that at some point when we talk about what is expected of a composer when you come in.
Let's hear it.
Now's a good time. Now's a good time.
All right. Okay, I'll tell this. I was still rather new to the business, and I got called in to fill in for the regular composers for a few episodes, and I met the producers at what's called the spotting session. And as we might talk about later, that's very important. The spotting session is where you decide where you're going to place the music. where it's going to come in, where it's going to go out. And not only is the music itself have to be right, but the placement has to be right. So we went through the show, and the producer asked the music editor, who is always there with the composer, so how much music do we have? And she said, well, we came up with 18 minutes. And she turned to me and said, well, we have to add a couple of more minutes because we always have 19 minutes on this show. And I thought to myself, what's this all about? I mean, every show is different. And if you have 2 minutes less or 2 minutes more, so what? But to them, it was very important. And, you have to go with the flow, and you have to say, sure, we'll add a couple of minutes of music. But it seemed kind of silly because the show didn't really merit that extra 2 minutes. But there you go.
Are these the same guys that changed their series theme? The same show? Was that the
same show? Same show. So
they cared about how many minutes of music, but not what the show personality was musically. That's odd, isn't it?
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, when you were coming in, getting back to what I was talking about continuity, is back in the day, meaning for me at least, the 1980s, when I got involved with it, you normally didn't have one composer doing all the episodes. They would mix it up. They'd have 2 or 3 composers. And so if you were being called into a show that already has established a musical style, when you're hired, they send you off with 2 or 3 episodes of what other composers have done for the show. And they say, we want you to be creative, but not too creative. We want you to know what it is that we've had before, and we'd like you kind of to stay in that vein. So that you have to be a chameleon. You have to be able to really, say this is what they've done. This is what they like. This is what I can deliver.
Well, that's kind of like working with the director and producer, which was one of my other questions, is since Tom had said you were not brought in then necessarily with what's going on as they are filming everything, but it's kind of at the end of that. How much autonomy do you have? And I know you got a lot of responsibility, but as far as being able to say, this is the music, I mean, they have some sort of an idea, I would imagine, as to what the theme is, how it's going to be action or romantic or drama or horror or whatever it happens to be like that. So how closely do you work then with is it the scriptwriter, perhaps the producer, director? Who is it that kind of determines ultimately what music they are going to have you write?
Well, if you're doing a feature film, you're normally working with the director. Film is I think, Tom, correct me if you have a different opinion, but I think that film is a director's medium and television is more of a producer's medium. Okay. And normally there is a producer, one of the producers, who deals with post-production. Post-production being music, sound design, all the stuff that comes after it's shot. And so that's who I would normally work with. There are occasions where there is a producer who is very involved with all aspects. I worked with a producer on a number of shows. Tom knows him well, Barney Rosenzweig, who brought me in on Cagney Lacy, and I did several other series with him. And he was of the opinion that the buck stops with me. If the show is a success, I think I deserve the credit to a large degree, but if it fails, I'm also responsible for it. And so you would spot it with Barney, and you knew at least that you were dealing with the person who was in charge, and that's always helpful, because if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, you don't know. You're making one person happy, and then somebody else will say, "Well, why the hell did you write it like this?" And you say, well, I spoke with your partner about it, and this is what we decided. And so that can get a little bit confusing for a composer. Composer likes to know that there is some agreement before you sit down and write something. Nobody likes surprises when it comes to the finished product. They kind of want to know what they're getting.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You're talking about the theme of that one series changing, and then they had to change back. But one thing I'd like you to explain to people is how you will develop, like you'll take the theme of the show, like when we did with Christy, with Barney and Pat Green and us, and there's a melodic theme to the show,
Right.
main title, and then how you will reprise that through some of the cues. Like, so when Kelly Martin's character was on screen, you would have echoes of that theme play.
Great question.
And maybe have melodic themes for some of the other characters, so right off the bat that it's like the Jaws thing, donut.
Exactly. It still plays in the background.
You know that the shark is coming, and will you explain a little bit how you do that musically for multiple characters throughout a piece, even a TV episode?
Well, I think that it's really, if you're lucky enough to either work with a theme that somebody else has written and you're called in to do the underscore, or if you compose the theme itself, if you get something that is memorable or versatile, take advantage of it. I've always liked to take a theme and take certain parts of it and weave it into a score. And actually,
leitmotif.
Yeah, like a motif, yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be for a particular character. I remember when I did Cagney and Lacy, the theme was written by a gentleman by the name of Bill Conti, who of course wrote Rocky. So
wow, I remember Bill Conti. Yeah, that guy was tremendous. He had a large library of scores.
Oh yeah, Bill was very talented. Is very talented.
He was Academy Award winner, wasn't he?
The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, he won for The Right Stuff. And I would take some of his theme from Cagney and Lacy, and I'd use it throughout the episode. Sometimes it's helpful because you're not really. It just again helps weave everything together. It gives people a sense of continuity. I get back to that word, but I think it's really an important one when it comes to putting a score together. And so the theme, I think, should be versatile, and you should be able to use it. Now, there are composers and there are themes that have absolutely, you'll never see it. You never hear it referenced in the score. So it's just a different approach.
Oh, interesting. Really interesting.
In writing also, talking about movies also, and I think, and for television as well, when you're referring to the underscore, those are the pieces in between the major pieces, I guess, where people are just talking and you're trying to have some music in between so there's no dead time, if you will. Is that what the underscore is you're talking about?
No, the underscore is basically, what you could refer to as the background music, which I hate when people say that. Oh, you wrote the background music for that? I said, no, I wrote the underscore. You are underscoring something. You're making a statement. And that's, when I was talking about my experience with Knots Landing, you have to decide what it is you're trying to say. What's happening in the scene, what's not happening in the scene. There are many times when the actors just don't quite connect, and you have to make them seem like they have more of a connection, or the scene is just not as scary as it should be, and you try to give it a little bit of fright. So you are underscoring emotion, location, any number of things.
Oh, I understand. You're really underscoring it. I was thinking the score you're writing in the, okay, gotcha.
Right. And actually getting
you're
back
emphasizing it, basically.
Yes. And hopefully adding another element. There's always the question is, well, am I just, pouring, more whipped cream on top of the topping, which you don't want to do. You want to add another element to it. And if it's already there, don't screw with it.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Going back to Cagney and Lacy for a minute, I would say that once a season, I would go in to spot the show with the producer. And basically, I talked myself out of a job because we decided that, you know what? I don't think we need music in this episode. And that would never happen today. But in those days, Barney would say to me, I think we really don't need much here. Why don't we just let it be dry? The music does not need to comment on what we're seeing. It's strong enough. The direction's good. The acting's great. So why don't you just go home and take a week off without pay, I may add.
You're not wrong. That would never happen today. for a lot of reasons, including the fact that a lot of contemporary shows are using song scores. They have all these records, that they're wallpapering the show end to end with songs, and then they ask you to try to duck and weave between those songs and support things that don't have records playing. And I don't know how you guys do that, because that has to be maddening.
Well, it's art and it's commerce. I mean, you're dealing with, an opportunity to maybe, take advantage of an artist and make money that way as well. So that's obviously become a very important part of the business.
Well, certainly people want to buy the album or download the digital music or whatever. And I'm thinking, for an example, let's say like Forrest Gump or American Graffiti, where music really drove the movie, and they were inextricably intertwined, one with the other, it seems. But in particular, with the music from Forrest Gump, it set the tone for a period, an age of each decade, and the music went along with his life. And then, like American Graffiti, and that night, all the music and that they're all hanging out with and everything, which that is different because that's already been written, basically, as opposed to original scores. In cases like that, I'm sure there again, they might, a composer would come in and score that a little bit differently, so you still have some of those undertones of some of the music they had played. So do you work with that very much then also, as far as some pre-recorded music that is in the genre currently, or in the zeitgeist, I should say?
Yeah, well, I'd say that what became really the modus operandi is for a music supervisor to be hired before a composer would be hired. And the music supervisor would go through the script and would earmark places where he would think that a song should go. So, and then probably the music supervisor was instrumental in the hiring of the composer. So it really depends who the director is, what the production company is, but music supervision has become key to to how you use underscore, how you use either original songs or if it's period piece like George Lucas and American Graffiti, or Forrest Gump and Bob Zemeckis. I mean, these people really know what they're doing, and you can trust them to make really good decisions. It's not always the case. You have people like that in charge.
By the way, I was thinking about earlier when you're saying that usually it's the director on a feature film, but there are those guys like Jerry Bruckheimer. He's in the room in the spotting session because he's has such a specific vision for his movies.
True.
So there are those guys. So Ron, I have a question for you that I think people would be interested in, going right back to what you actually do. So you go to the spotting session. You decide that this cue is going to start at 6:02 and it's going to go to 9:22 and it's going to bridge a scene transition. That everybody agrees on that, and it's going to be, and you have a discussion philosophically. It's going to be orchestral. It's going to be a solo piano. It's going to be a solo violin. What you guys talk about some of that. Then you go home. How do you write? Do you sit at a piano with staff paper and write notes on a paper? Do you do it in a computer and it generates the lead sheet for you, and then you fill it in? How do you actually do it, assuming you're going to have a real orchestra to conduct, as opposed to a synthesizer score?
Great question.
Well, certainly the whole creative process has changed with the with technology. When I began, I would sit at the piano and I'd have a piece of manuscript paper and I'd sketch things out, and then I would write it out for orchestra. Orchestration, meaning you would take a sketch and you would decide what instruments were going to play what parts. Think of it as someone who makes a black and white drawing, that's the sketch, and then they turn it into a painting, and that's the orchestration. And of course, orchestration is very important. Technology has turned everything on its head. And there are some composers who continue to write with pencil and paper because they just find that it's the way that they find. They don't want to be captive to the technology. They still feel like that's the way to go, even if eventually it is performed using samples and synthesizers. Other people have fully embraced it, and they sit at a keyboard with their, Mac Pro and their computer programs, and they have all these, amazing sounds, and they construct the score that way. I began doing it with pencil and paper. I then made the transition to working at a workstation, basically, with all the toys. It's interesting you ask, Tom, because I've been composing recently and sort of feeling that the technology for me was kind of getting in the way. And so I decided I was going to just take some manuscript paper and go out in the living room to my piano and start seeing what I come up with. And it's been really an eye-opener because, as I said, sometimes the technology, as wonderful as it is, can hamstring you. It can just, you fall in love with the sounds, you fall in love with the grooves, and you sort of fool around, but it's not coming from here.
Do you often work with a partner in scoring the music, or is it always yourself?
No, I don't work with a partner. I have on occasion worked with orchestrators. And again, those are the people who would take my sketch and come up with the full-fledged arrangement, so to speak, for orchestra. And they can really make you sound good. They can really be helpful and give you a different point of view.
If people think that John Williams is actually writing, every note for the trombones on a piece of paper, they're deluded, because he has people, fully qualified composers in their own right, I'm sure, orchestrators who listen to what his sketch is, and I'm sure talk to him and know what his tastes and judgments are, and then they can write those sections out for the full orchestra and then run them by him, right?
Well, you chose a bad guy to use as an example.
He actually does it on himself.
Because John Williams' sketches are so complete that it basically could go to the copyist. And
so he pretty much does it all himself.
He is extremely specific. Now, there are other people who are very fine composers, and just because they don't have the time, if nothing else, they do sketch it out and they allow people to flesh it out. And that's when an orchestrator is more than a glorified copyist. He is an important creative contributor. But John Williams, he has master orchestrators, but I think they'd be the first ones to tell you that their contributions are not as great as it is for other composers they work with.
And there have been some very successful composers who began as an orchestrator arranger for other composers as they kind of apprenticed. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely. It's very, very good way to learn the business. Most composers have to start someplace and think about it. Yeah. Is a producer going to go and say, Ron Ramin, I'm just going to hire you. You haven't really done much, but I'm going to hire you. If I have apprenticed with somebody and they say, they check up on you. And if the person you've worked for, your mentor, says, this guy's the real deal, then it helps. It helps a lot. So now a lot of people have apprenticed for Hans Zimmer. Mm-hmm. And they've gone on to have incredibly good careers. So, that's really a great thing. And I always, when people call me and they say, well, how do I get going in the business? And I said, well, if you can find somebody to mentor you, to give you responsibility, to oversee, that's a really good way to see how they deal with people, how they deal with the whole process. Writing music is just part of the deal. You have to know how to go out there. You have to be able to have the gift of gab. You have to show up at the right places. You have to do a lot of things that have very little to do with the actual composing. I always say composing is the easy part. The hard part is getting the gig. And the question is, how do you get the gig?
When we did the sequel miniseries to the original Christy project, a lot of things had to change. First of all, we were on a different network, it was a different production company, and I found out when I signed on that the new production it only owned characters that were in the original novels. None of the original characters from the series transferred over. And also, of course, all the music that you wrote belonged to the original entity. And I remember calling you and saying, well, we got to do this thing, but we have to do all new music. And I remember there was a moment you kind of went, oh, because it was such a beautiful theme and there's such memorable music. And then I remember I could almost see the light bulb go on. Well, yeah, this might be a good opportunity. I'd like to explore that character and situation again musically. And that theme was as beautiful and as memorable as I thought the original was, and it worked. It was very suitable for the three movies that we did.
Well, thank you for saying that. I remember being a little disappointed because, you write a theme, and as we discussed earlier, if you take a theme and you weave it in your underscore, which now we know that underscore it helps, highlight emotion, or right. Time, place, all those things. Now, all of a sudden, you have to say, well, they liked the series enough to pick it up for 3 2-hour movies, but we can't use the music, or you can get sued. The music that I wrote, even though I'm going to, be the composer again, that was disappointing. So you have to sort of.
Who owns it?
The network, or this production company that originally made it. So just like when I write a script for somebody, I wrote the script, but they own it. They can do whatever they want with that script. And if they owe me money or something, they owe me money. But the fact is they own it. And so, an architect designs a house for you. Well, you own that schematic. You own that drawing. And so in this case, production company owned it. That production company was not involved in the sequel. It was a whole different company. They acquired the rights to the book, which had reverted to the family of Catherine Marshall. They acquired the rights. They commissioned a whole new production. And a few of us from the original show were asked back, and I came back as a showrunner, and I wanted a few of the original actors to reprise their roles. And I absolutely wanted Ron Ramin because the music was so identifiable, and I knew that even if, we had to have new music, that new music would still provide continuity that Ron was talking about. Continuity is really important. And even from a series to 8 years later, a mini series, you still want some level of continuity, and the musical sensibility that he brought to it was unique, specific. And if a different composer had come in, it might have been perfectly good music. It wouldn't have had that deeper emotional connection, in my opinion, that he had to the material. And he went up to Vancouver and conducted the orchestra up there, which was rather large organization, as I recall, and it sounded a lot like the original recordings in that sense, because he had a real orchestra on the.
And why going to Vancouver versus doing it here?
We shot up in Vancouver.
Yeah, we shot in Vancouver.
And it was financial. The Canadian government has incentives to have productions come there. We were one of those groups and plus the exchange rate at that time was 35%. So if you pay $100 for something in Canada, it still says $100, but in fact it was 65 cents US. So Ron could have a full orchestra of professional musicians. I think they were from the Vancouver Opera Company, weren't they, Ron? Most of them?
Yeah, most of them were.
But he could have the recording studio and all these players and all of that, all the bells and whistles, for a third less than it would have cost to do it in Los Angeles, maybe more than a third less. And it wasn't our choice. They said, this is where you want music, this is where you're doing it, because they could then save that money. And we're trying to do a high quality production for less money than the original CBS series. And that worked out great. He got to go up there and he worked with those musicians, and it was a beautiful score.
Ron, I have a question also. You had said people come to you often will say, well, how do I get into working and composing music for film and television and everything. I want to go back, I guess, to your roots also. Did you, after going to school and music school, decide I want to do movies, or were you composing something else and fell into it, or what was your path?
Well, I was fortunate. I grew up in a musical family. My father was a composer and an orchestrator, and he had a very successful career in New York. And as an only child, I was brought to Los Angeles when they would vacation in Los Angeles. And they'd be hanging out with Henry Mancini and John Williams and all these people. And I got taken along. So I got to spend time with them. And what I saw was that these people loved what they did. They did not treat this as a job. They would get together at dinner and they talk shop. They talk about their latest projects or, if you want to be a composer and you want to hear your music, at least back in those days, pre-synthesizers, you wanted to hear it. You didn't just want to write something and put it in a drawer. The best opportunity was to write music for films. And so I kind of grew up in the business. And so after I graduated from college on the East Coast, I moved to Los Angeles because that was the only place to be. Now, you can find productions everywhere around the world. But
Atlanta, Austin, every place. Yeah.
I'm watching this amazing television series that was, a Spanish series that was shot in Madrid. And, but it was LA at the time. You had to be there. And so, but I was lucky because I had some idea of what I was getting into. What I didn't understand was that I was looking at a very rarefied group of composers. I didn't see all the people who didn't make it. I saw the people who go up and win Academy Awards and win Emmy Awards.
Including your dad.
Yes, yeah, my dad did. And so
What did he win for?
He was one of the orchestrators and music supervisors of West Side Story in 1961.
I've heard of that.
Yeah,
little film.
They're doing a little sequel to it that's coming in December.
I heard. Are you involved with that sequel by chance at all?
Oh, no. I wasn't in any way involved except, through my dad. And
through birth.
Tremendous affection for that score. And
did he work on Broadway? That's a completely
did.
Different kind of a thing, I would think.
He began as an orchestrator of Broadway shows. That's when he did West Side Story on Broadway. He did Gypsy with Ethel Merman.
Yeah.
He did A Funny Thing Happened on My Way to the Forum, which of course was another Stephen Sondheim show. And he did a number of shows, and then he just decided, I'm going to do commercials. Someone gave him an opportunity. And so he was one of those jingle guys in the Mad Men era who would just turn out these 30-second jingles. And you probably know a lot of them.
What were one or two of his more famous ones you remember?
Well, probably the most famous was he did a commercial for Diet Pepsi, which was called the Girl Watchers theme, which became a song, Music to Watch Girls.
That's a girls buy, yeah.
And he wrote that, and that was a fluke. It was written as a commercial for Diet Pepsi. And then all of a sudden, someone recorded it as an instrumental, and then Andy Williams called my dad and said, I want to sing this, get a lyric and I'll sing it. Wow. And it became a hit again with a vocal. And it's just, it's just one of those lucky things that happen.
You never know.
You never know. I've heard it say that son of a gun works so hard to be lucky. And I love that expression. But there is an element of luck in anybody's success and being at the right place at the right time.
Like Paul Williams and the Carpenters, and he had a jingle that became We've Only Just Begun. That was a bank commercial originally. He had like one verse, and that was all he wrote. And he had to write the rest of the song, and it wound up being a #1 hit record and really transformed his songwriting career. So.
Yeah, it happens. So so my dad did do a lot of Broadway, and it's an intoxicating business.
And so that's what kind of got you into it, and then had you move out to LA, and because that's where at the time the film business was. And did you start mentoring under someone, understudy?
Yeah, I did. First I snuck into as many recording sessions as I could. What was very important was making friends with
like Herb Albert Studio and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would go to Universal. I'd go to Warner Brothers, to MGM, all these places, and I made it a point to become friends with the people who worked in the music department, and they'd get me a pass. So I could go and I could see, everybody from Jerry Goldsmith and Leonard Rosenman and, all of these talented people. You also learn what doesn't work. You see some people up there on the podium and you watch and listen to the music and you say, not so good. So, you learn what to do, and you
have
learn
a discerning ear.
Doesn't work. You have to have a discerning ear.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I got lucky. I did apprentice with a very prolific TV composer by the name of Mark Snow.
Oh.
And Mark, among other things, did the X-Files. Years later, I mean, I worked for him when he was doing a lot of stuff like The Love Boat and, a lot of other shows. And he allowed me to, basically do a little ghostwriting when he got busy, which was often. He's extremely talented.
Because he had other shows he was working on. He couldn't.
He had other shows, and he was very good about helping some younger people. And so I got to write a few cues, and if it didn't work out, it was his problem, not mine. And that's a risk that anybody takes, But fortunately, it didn't happen too often. And Mark was very kind to me. And you try to pay it forward in some ways. And when people ask you for advice, you really try to help them. I never think that they're after my job.
Yeah.
You said something a minute ago that I don't want it to just evaporate without comment. You were able to see what didn't work just as much as you saw, of course, a lot that did work. And boy, that is so crucial for any of these creative jobs. It's not just enough to know how to do this or this or this, but to intuitively understand this is not going to work, or you see it. I'm sure on the scoring stage, you had cues that you were doing the orchestra, and you go, ooh, this isn't working. And you have to be able to deconstruct that real quickly and make a change, whatever that is, right? And that is so important for people to understand that professionals are constantly bumping up against what doesn't work. And the more you do these things, the more you can bypass some of those mistakes. But if you're watching Jerry Goldsmith and you could see things that maybe didn't work and watched how he fixed them on the spot, changing, notes that guys are playing, which always blew my mind. How somebody go, you play a B flat there. What? How did you hear that? But you do. That's what you guys do. But it's still really interesting to me, that remark that you made, because knowing what didn't work, whether it's your own mistakes or watching other people's mistakes, that's crucial to become a good showrunner, become a good screenwriter, become a good actor, certainly a good film composer.
Well, it's really key. And what I learned by hanging out and watching some of these guys was most of them were really good in communicating. And I would sit in the booth, which is where the engineer is and where the producers might be, and I would sort of be in a corner someplace. And I would have preferred to have been on the stage, in the room with the orchestra. But I realized that I would learn more by being in the booth, because then I'd hear all the gossip that was going on. And the producer would say things like, God damn it, I thought I was getting something scarier. What's he trying to do here? And I would, and then I would see the composer come in, and a producer would say something a little more diplomatic, saying, make it a little scarier here. And he would say, he might say, no problem. I was wondering about this myself. Go out on the podium, make a slight change. Everybody's happy. And I realized you have to be a diplomat. You have to have firm convictions. You have to make a stand, but you also have to know when to say, you know what, it's not my show. I'm hired to do this, and I don't I have to be able to adjust and adapt. And people such as Henry Mancini, they were successful not only because they wrote phenomenal stuff, but they knew how to get along with people.
Marvin
They knew
Hamlish.
how to make partners with people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if you can make a partner with somebody, if you can make it so that person trusts you, then you can get away with a lot of stuff.
And if you're hard to work with, I guess, then you're not going to be working very long in that industry, I would think. Just as Tom has talked about in previous weeks with other people, you really have to be friends with everyone. I mean, whether it's the carpenter, the prop guy, the wardrobe, or the hairstyle, everybody, because you're a family. And I think you have to, even though you were brought in towards the end after the thing is kind of together, you may not know all those people who are behind the scenes, but still the ones you work with are your new family, and you have to be able to get along with them. But I think you do have some autonomy to make it the way you want it. But ultimately, if it's between you and the director, I guess the director's decision is the one that's going to be, okay, I'll go back and do that if I want to stay on this film and get paid. Otherwise, I guess I will just stand aside and let you get somebody else to come in here. But typically it's like, okay, I'm easy to get along with. I understand your vision and I can do that.
Well, there's one composer who notably was a real curmudgeon and didn't make even an attempt to get along with people, and that was the legendary Bernard Herrmann. And he, for those of you who are not familiar with Bernard Herrmann, he was known for his collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock. So he did North by Northwest. He did Vertigo. He did The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Did he do Psycho?
He did Psycho. Of course.
Oh yeah, famously, yeah.
And
Wow.
But he actually, there was a movie, I think it was 1964 or 65, called Torn Curtain. I don't know whether either of you guys have seen this.
I've seen him. I've seen all of Hitchcock's.
Okay, so Torn Curtain doesn't say Bernard Herrmann. It says, I think John Addison did it. And it's because
he took him off.
Hitchcock went to Herrmann and says, can you write me something that's got more of a melody? And can you write something, this was in the middle of the pop tune mania of the 60s, the Days of Wine and Roses from Breakfast and Tiffany and all of these things. Everything was shifting, and it was very different than what Bernard Herrmann did. And what Bernard Herrmann did was he absolutely thumbed his nose at Hitchcock and wrote a score. Not only did he not use flutes, he used bass flutes. He used everything that was the antithesis of what Hitchcock
intentionally to kind of piss him off.
I think he just, I don't know what the motivation was, but he didn't care about making friends. He cared about doing what he thought was right. And as a matter of fact, when Hitchcock went to the scoring stage and he heard it, he fired him, threw the score out, hired somebody else, and I don't think they ever talked again, or they never really reconciled. And they never worked professionally again after that.
Actually, have been a couple of incidents. I don't remember any of the titles, and it's probably unimportant, but there have been a few movies where they tossed the whole score and redid it just because whatever they thought they wanted, they decided they didn't want, or the guy
whole score,
whatever.
Wow.
But
it's a badge of honor, actually, these days. They say you've never really arrived until you've had a score thrown out. And it happens to everybody. As a matter of fact, I once heard Henry Mancini speak, and someone asked him, have you ever had a score thrown out? And he said, I was hired to do a Hitchcock film. This must have been, post Bernard Herrmann. And I'm out on the podium and I keep looking in the booth and Hitchcock is nodding and I think everything's okay. I got a call that night, you're fired. And this is Hank Mancini. I mean, and Alan Silvestri has scores thrown out. Michel Legrand, one of the great composers.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy can write and arrange in a way that, is just mind-boggling. He probably has had more scores thrown out than any film composer that ever lived, because he had his own way of looking at things. It was a very French approach, and maybe with some directors, it just didn't work for them.
Well, I will go back in your memory to one of our jobs together, which was Walker, Texas Ranger, where several composers were sent away and replaced with a couple of people, including yourself, when I took the show over, not because they weren't capable. In fact, one of them was a friend of mine, but the sensibilities of the music didn't make sense to my ear. And if you remember, when you came on, one of the things we talked about all the time was it's got to feel like we're in Texas. It can't feel like it's some, what I'll say, generic cop show in any big city, USA. It's in Texas. And so we're talking about some acoustic guitar and some dobros and things to make us feel maybe a little bit of musical texture, like it's
Right.
It's
not like the big city of New York. There are some things. I know what you mean.
Yeah, but Ron, I don't know if you even remember those days, but it was trying to move the show forward and upward creatively. You know, was not just about changing scripts or and other personnel, but just something so important and basic as where is this show taking place? And it can't sound like it's in New York City or LA. It's got to sound like it's in Texas. And so you knew what that meant. You could deconstruct that idea beautifully. And so we had scores that felt a bit Texas, a bit Southern, a bit Western, sure, but then orchestral when they needed to be. But there was always that flavor. The color of Texas was in the score. And that was a very important contributor to the fact that show went from number 40 in the ratings to number 10 in the ratings during that period of time. I'm convinced a lot of it had to do with something as, I say simple, but maybe simple, as the music that felt like it was really taking place where it was taking place.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Tom, because I did I did the last season of a television series that was the new Mike Hammer, which was about Mike Hammer, of course, who was played by Stacy Keach, and he was a private investigator in New York. The 3 TV movies, one of them took place in Las Vegas, but I remember the first one I don't recall, but the third one that I did took place in Miami, but they shot it in San Diego, and the producer, who was a very nice guy friend of mine, Jeff Morton, he said to me, how are we going to make this look like Miami? And I said, Jeff, this is a piece of cake. I'm going to write you a sort of a Cuban Miami score. And you're going to feel like you're in Miami. And it kind of worked. I mean, that was an easy fix. So Tom, what you're saying is you take advantage of the fact that it's a region, it's an area, it's a sensibility, and music can put you in a place, can put you in a time, and
in a mood, a feeling, emotion,
and a mood. But you know, and it's kind of fun. Kind of fun to do.
Also,
wow,
Scott, I was reminded that we talked about song scores earlier, using contemporary records. Right. I guess we call them maybe still. Whatever the hell they are, downloads. I used to tell my students at the university is that while that may feel very contemporary and very hip and all that, that goes out of date real fast. So if you had the new Justin Timberlake record 10 years ago, it might feel a little dated now, whereas a classic, what I'll call classical score, an orchestral score, will have a shelf life that's much, much longer. Music trends change, and Bernard Herman score doesn't sound like a Ron Ramin score because the sensibilities change, but they last a lot longer. And especially if you want something that needs to be timeless, like a historical piece or whatever, like when we did Christy, it felt. And in fact, I think you're the one that taught me this. That it feels like it's always going to feel, and it's not going to feel dated because it's classic in its music approach. And I learned a lot from you on that. And you were right, because music doesn't. You say it sets a time and a place and so forth, but unintentionally, you could set a time and place that you don't want later. 10 years from now, you watch something and say, "Oh my God, it's so corny. It's wrong." And well, because maybe you didn't do it in a more classical approach.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that when you look at something like Christy, If you looked at it today and you watched it, you'd say, I would say I really wouldn't change the tenor of music because it's timeless.
Yeah.
It's and you do have to be careful if you do something that's too of the moment, unless you're writing for a particular time period. If you're looking back at the 1980s, or if you're going to write a disco score and it's looking back at the 70s, that's great.
Yeah.
But if you're writing a disco score in the 70s simply because, you look at Starsky and Hutch, for instance.
Right.
Look at a show like that in the 1970s, and you listen to the music and you'll say, God, that's pretty bad. I mean,
it was dated
because it's so dated. It's not that it's bad. I shouldn't say that. It's dated.
Yeah.
But a show like Christy, and actually, I used to work for a guy who named Walter Scharf, who did a lot of documentaries and a lot of things in the 40s and the 50s. And when he was doing things like, Jacques Cousteau, he said, you make sure you do something, and the music, when you watch this documentary in 30 years, is going to sound as fresh as it is when you write it. Don't be cute. Don't try to be too contemporary.
Excellent. Wow. But speaking of contemporary and things that you're doing now, are you still scoring for TV, or what kind of compositions are you working on currently?
Well, I kind of make the transition out of that, and I'm now more involved with writing music that would be played in a concert hall.
That's too bad, because I have a $300 million feature film that I wanted you to score, but
well, then just forget what I just said. Then I disavow what I just said. I've always had a love for orchestra. I grew up going to concerts, and to me, it's a very different process, Scott, when you're writing for the concert hall. In a way, it's kind of terrifying, because you're looking at a blank page and you have to look inwards and you have to say, what the hell do I have to say? When you're writing for a film, you're given a certain framework. Mm-hmm. And it gives you have a roadmap, so to speak. You can take a lot of different roads, but you've got the roadmap. But when you are writing something that's all on you, and you have to be the lead, it's very different. You're no longer the seasoning of the dish. You're the main course, and right. that can be a little unnerving. And I've listened to a lot of quote serious composers talk about it, and everybody sort of freaks out a little bit when they sit down and they say, what am I going to say? Where do I start?
Even Aaron Copeland?
Well, I don't know about Aaron Copeland, but composers today, and I've been listening to some of the Zoom interviews with composers, and what their process is and how they deal with it, and it's very interesting to hear how everybody deals with creating something from scratch.
Because you're still writing about something, an emotion or a thought or something. It's coming from somewhere.
Yeah, it is.
Or something, yeah.
And it's not coming from what the script says it's coming from. It's coming from, what are you feeling today?
In your experience.
Your life, how's the world around you? And right. And so you're trying to transpose those things into notes on a page to share with people.
Boy, how I wish we had some sort of an example of that.
Yeah, we do. Ron's got something there.
Oh, okay. You're gonna listen to something. Well, this is something that I've written. I decided to write a suite, sort of my impressions of the state of California. That's called Golden State of Mind, and I'm just going to try to cue up here the third movement of this suite, and it's called Alvaro Street. And what it is it's, for those of you who've never heard of Alvaro Street, it's a very old part in downtown Los Angeles, which was basically the first Mexican community, I think, settled around Alvaro Street. And so while far be it for me to write something that is, really authentic, music, I wanted to write a tribute to those people who came and have helped make Los Angeles what it is. It's a vibrant place that, thank goodness for the immigration that has taken place there. So this is the opening of it, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Okay, that's enough of that.
Hey, yay.
That is fantastic. Man, I can get the feeling.
Where did you record that?
That, you're not going to, Tom, I did this right here in my studio.
What? You had all of the orchestra in your studio?
Yeah, it's a lot of people to feed, I know.
That's an electronic score?
They're all living in my hard drive.
And socially distanced.
Well, first of all, I couldn't tell. It sounded like true concert hall.
It did.
I thought you were, at the, one of the Philharmonics somewhere around the country. That's really well done. By the way, that Alvaro Street, for anybody that's watching this, that I know they're like, nobody watched the Oscars, but the train station where the Oscars were the other night was right across the street from Alvaro Street, that famous train station. So, wow, that was really good, Ron.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun to do that. I'm hoping that I think it's good. The whole suite would be good for an outdoor concert, in particular, a California-based concert, and it was a lot of fun to write it. But as we were talking about, doing music for film is a slightly different process, and you have to put yourself in a different mindset to compose something where you are the center of attention.
Yeah, I can't. I can imagine it, and yet because I'm from this film world, it's almost impossible for me to get my brain out of that. Because in film, you are locked. People don't necessarily know how intricately you're locked to what's happening on the screen, but things that you would probably never compose that way, where it speeds up and then it slows down, and then there's an edit to another shot, and everything shifts on the edit. I mean, all that stuff technically that you have to do and still have it be music, is so antithetical to what we just heard.
And a lot of times you don't even recognize that. I went to, I have tickets for the Houston Symphony. We have one of the best symphonies in the world here. And I was at one where they had Star Wars playing on a big screen TV, and they had to keep saying throughout the whole time, look at us every once in a while, because we're playing. This is live orchestra. This is just the speech that you're seeing and you're watching the film. But remember, the music is all coming from this. So, go down and look at the violinist, look at the piccolo player and the bassoonist and everybody. I mean, this is, you kind of forget. And I think that's kind of like what an umpire's job is. An umpire on the field of play is not supposed to be interfering, but they make sure that things are working properly. And the same thing, I think the music should drive the movie or the theatrical production forward and almost be kind of not forgettable until you leave the theater and you're whistling or humming that tune as you leave.
Well, you have no idea of what you just said, how true that is. I can attest to the fact that I have sat in a room with Ron Ramin and said, oh my God, what are we going to do? This is the worst piece of crap ever committed to film. Can you save this?
Yeah.
And I mean,
he does.
Yeah.
All right.
What do you do? And let me see what I can do. And then you hear the score to picture, and it's like somebody opens a window and lets the fresh air in. Oh, that's what it was supposed to have been. And it's all done with smoke and mirrors. I mean, you're a magician. He's a magician too, because it's smoke and mirrors a lot of this musically, that things that, and I know a little bit about music, but I don't even know how he does what he does.
Well, I think a lot of times, Tom, the composer is asked to fix things that really can't be fixed and is blamed because they figure there's an expression, we'll save it in post, meaning don't worry, once we get the music in and the sound design, the fact that the director did not do a very good job, we'll fix it. We'll make him look better. There was a film composer who was asked question, can music save a film? And he very wittily said, well, a film composer is like a mortician. You can make it look better, but you can't bring it back to life. And that is kind of the way I think all composers do. Whenever a producer or director says, you got to save the scene, it's like, oh, crap. I can make it a little more palatable, but if they didn't do their job, don't expect the music to do everything because it can't.
Well, but I have a personal experience with you. You have, on several occasions, taken something that should have been put out of its misery, and in my opinion, and whether I wrote it or somebody else wrote it, I produced it, and whatever went wrong. It's not an exact science making these things, and sometimes they just go wrong, really, 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 really wrong. And after the editor does everything he or she can to try to make it work, and whatever, you shoot new scenes, you add stuff, you stock footage, whatever all those things, those tricks. And it's, Ron, please. Please. And you have done it multiple times.
Oh, thank you.
And it's hard for people to fully understand unless they've been in the room and they've seen the raw thing with the dry tracks and no sound effects and no, which can also help, obviously, a soundscape. But the right score, kind of aggressively applied in some instances, I would use it aggressively. I have seen it. You've done it, and more power to you. It's a miracle, kind of.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody starts off with the best of intentions. It's kind of like the beginning of the baseball season, and every team, even the ones are not going to perform very well. Everybody wants to win, and you do the best you can, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and you all have to do what you can to make things competitive, so to speak. And music can help, but there's a limit to what it can do.
Makes sense.
I will dispute that, Ron Ramin.
Well, listen, this has just been a fabulous broadcast here with this last hour. Man, lots of great stories and good tips and everything. Ron, thanks so very much for all that you have done over the years, and particularly being our guest here on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Scott.
Thank you, Ron.
It's Tom, my old buddy. It's great to see you as always.
You too. It's been way too long.
It has.
We'll talk
Thanks
soon.
a lot.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Man, Tom, I tell you, you got a winner there. That was, I love talking music and then film. As I said, it just blended together. This was great. Thanks for bringing him in.
I'm grateful that he agreed to do it. And you can see when you're working with somebody like that, he's so affable and he's so thoughtful, not to mention just gifted in his skills. Sure. But it's a real pleasure when you work side by side with somebody in a true collaborative spirit, and especially if it's a good project. And several of our projects have been really good projects, and it's wonderful. It's a real privilege.
Well, as they probably said on your old TV show, it's great when a plan comes together, huh?
Yeah, that's right. That's
you ever get sick of hearing that?
No, it was fun to type those words too when they would show up in a script. So
did you really? Who was the first one who actually said that? Was it one of your previous?
Steve Cannell and Frank Lupo, who created A-Team, wrote that, and that was Hannibal Smith, George Papard.
Yeah.
But that they created that. So, but all the writers, would get to get to put that in. Is almost a signature. You had to do it, and it was fun. It was fun. So
yeah, that's true.
And, thanks so much for hosting this again, Scott. Good.
You're welcome. And I know we're going to have a great guest coming up next week, and we're going to save that as a surprise. So make sure you come back next Wednesday night. And if you missed this in live time and you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, be sure to like the page and to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So this way you're notified when we are going to be going live, so you can watch this. And that way you can contribute with your comments and questions in live time. And this way that our guests can respond to whatever questions you might have, because this has just been a lot of fun, and it's a labor of love. Tom and I do for this. I mean, he's really the guru behind this. Who it was the film teacher and the one with all the background, and I've just pulled the levers and push the buttons.
You're the eye candy.
Yes, I am. Yeah, anyway, second most interesting man in the world. There we go. Until next time, that was Tom Blumquist. This is Scotty out.
Thanks for being with us. Please join us again next time for Mincing Movie Magic.